guess I'd pull it right back and make it about character.
Well, welcome to Before the Weekend, episode 11. Can we believe it? And today we're going to examine the property stories that matter from this week. We're going to challenge the claims being made and look really beyond the political headlines to what decisions mean for the real world. Today, though, our key story is from Victorian Premier turning a policy disagreement into a personal fight. The REI New South Wales calling for the removal of government minister and the Australian housing targets colliding with another round of tax reform. Who would have thought? Another interesting week in real estate. And with me today, of course, is my co-host, Pete Schravemade. How are we today, Pete?
Fighting fit. I'm actually feeling, like I said to you off air, I was feeling a little bit tired, but I'm actually feeling a bit refreshed. It's been a big couple of weeks. And I know we say that a lot, but it has been a big couple of weeks. So
it has been.
I'm on the tail end of that. I am looking forward to the weekend. No disrespect to the property professionals out there who have to work. I'm not working this weekend. Just noticed I put my shirt on back to front.
There we go.
we're off to a great start. See the scene there, and I'm not taking it off because this is being televised. But yeah, what a great Friday. Obviously, I'm on top of everything.
Absolutely, you are.
You didn't notice either. Where's your property management skills?
I didn't notice that. Yeah, I do have a lot of attention to detail, but I really was not focusing on your t-shirt this morning. Actually, what I was doing was actually researching our guest today, Mike Mortlock, obviously, who's joining us to unpack some of the latest housing and tax settings. He'll be joining us later. He's also got a fantastic podcast, so really looking forward to Mike joining us. But Pete, I really want to dive into what's going on in Victoria. We can all have a little bit of a giggle about it, but I think it's a fairly serious matter. Policy seems to have become incredibly personal down in Victoria.
Yeah, it did. It was a really bizarre week. To be honest, this is a news topic that I was raging about on Saturday. I was absolutely fuming. What happened is Jacinta Allan, the Honourable Jacinta Allan, who was the Premier of Victoria, I think she cast an unprecedented attack against Toby Balazs, who's the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. I think it was completely unwarranted. It looked to me to be completely personal. It bypassed all her public relations channels, went straight to her social media. I was annoyed, frustrated, and upset that this would happen. Look, I understand people have differences of opinion in politics, but this was particularly, I thought it was a low blow.
Yeah. Why do you think potentially this was directed at Toby?
I think she's trying to win votes.
Okay.
Yeah, like if you follow, and I responded to it publicly almost immediately as soon as I saw it. If you follow the narrative, the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, it's all about underquoting, which is a big issue in Victoria. And there's a lot of frustration around it. And it's largely being directed at real estate agents. And to be honest, some of them are doing the wrong thing. There's no one on the call, not you, not I, not the REIV, probably not the Premier of Victoria, although I don't actually think she cares, but there's none of us that actually think underquoting is a good thing. What it does, if you're new to real estate or you don't understand, it's the practice of that is largely in auctions, but also sometimes in private treaties where a real estate agent will profess that the property of price, let's say it's a $4 million house, they'll say it'll probably sell for $3 million. A bunch of buyers turn up. And the reason they do this is they think that people have more money than they actually do. So a range of buyers will turn up around the $3 million mark and they'll be unable to get to the $4 million, but it'll go far beyond that. And what happens is you have 20 people walk away from an auction upset because they feel deceived into thinking that there was a hope for them to purchase that property. And where it's happening more is probably not in the $4 million mark. It's like down in the, they've been told it won't go over 2 million or the price guide sits between 1.4 and 1.8. Then it sells for 2.5. did we get that price guide wrong, or did the market speak on the day? And there's this perennial argument going backwards and forwards as to, why it happens. Now, I will admit I've seen some agents who have priced things unconscionably low in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of operators in Victoria don't set out to, or New South Wales, anyone in the auction process, if you've actually spoken to them, they don't set out to mislead people. It doesn't do them any good. I think it is a select amount. I remember, the guy that we had out of New South Wales that was sanctioned by the Office of Fair Trading, that in New South Wales, he was underquoting. He was drastically underquoting to get people there. So coming back to it, there's this issue of underquoting. Now, the REIV has been preaching for ages about transparency. It had a blueprint. It set up a group of people, I forget, well, let's call it an action group for want of a better word, that actually had the government on it to talk about this and how we stamp it out and how we remove it. And before the action group, handed out its final remarks, the member who I think was on that action group and the government released their own blueprint themselves, claiming it was theirs. It wasn't theirs at all. There were parts of it. So they just cherry picked bits of that action group and said, right, we're going to put it in there. And what the REIV did, and I'm saying the REIV did it. Yeah, maybe the CEO Toby Balazs was on there, but what the REIV did is it wrote a letter to Jacinta Allan saying, Jacinta, or Honourable Jacinta Allan, Premier of Victoria, we understand that you've implemented these, but here are ones that you've missed, and here are the reasons that this is so important to the process. Like one of the things Toby was arguing is it's going to destroy auctions. He's got a independent survey that says that 94% of Victorians won't go to auction now. They'll do a private treaty. And now if your end goal is for transparency, and you send people to private treaty, which is the way things are sold largely, Queensland, a lot of the other states, they just won't put a price on it. Do you think that's more transparent? Like anyone that's tried to buy in Adelaide recently, there's no price on anything there. And I don't like that. I don't think that's great either. But, if your end goal is for transparency, you probably need to have a bit of a think about it if you're driving them all to private treaty and destroying auctions in the process. Auctions actually play a really vital part of our economy. They tell us what the market is doing on a particular day. It's a different way of doing a transaction. I think there's a lot that actually benefits the vendor in there, which is, by the way, the fiduciary interest of the agent. So, some of them would it's a legitimate sales tool. So anyway, having said all of that, Jacinta Allan releases a letter that falsely claims that the REIV, well, she didn't actually say the REIV at all. It was all about Toby. Toby is, poor Toby, who's been in the role for less than a year. She says that Toby doesn't stand for any kind of transparency in the process, which is completely not Toby or the REIV's policy. And then she goes on to say, basically throw him under the bus by saying that Victorians are sick of wasting their time on open homes. Well, that's all stuff that the REIV has stood for. So, I took issue with it for a few reasons. Number one, that she's singling Toby out. Why not mention the REIV? Why not say something about that? Secondly, because there are three claims that I read, at least three claims in the letter to the public on her social media that are deliberately deceitful, false and misleading. And the third thing I take incredible issue with is this government, this particular Victorian Labor government, has itself a load of transparency issues, like so many transparency issues. There's an estimated $15 billion missing in CFMEU funds that the Honourable Jacinta Allan won't call a royal commission into. She keeps referring it to the Victorian Police. Well, the Victorian Police have turned around and said it needs to go to a royal commission. She's not doing it. It appears as though something's hiding. And this is before we go all the way back with this government. Dan Andrews has said, this is back to COVID. This government is not transparent at all. All of a sudden, just prior to an election, they've decided to start throwing barbs at the real estate community. And I'll add a fourth thing before I get off my soapbox. The fourth thing is Consumer Affairs Victoria, which is the Queensland Office of Fair Trading, New South Wales Office of Fair Trading, whatever it is in your state. They have always had the power and have been prosecuting people for underquoting, but all of a sudden have announced some really high-profile cases, as though Jacinta has waved a wand and given them more power. They had the power to start off with, and they haven't been policing it. And then Consumer Affairs Victoria have a 6-month wait on urgency tenancy applications, like to do anything about that. So, look, the whole system is broken down there. It just seemed really rich for the Premier of Victoria to come out attacking this man because he's executing his job on behalf of real estate members in Victoria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, and I think she wasn't directly elected, right? So she kind of stepped in, right? Once Dan Andrews,
big problem. Not
once Dan Andrews kind of, left the party, however he left the party, but then she kind of took over, right? So I guess, and from the voting perspective, the public haven't actually selected her in that role or chosen for her. So I guess with everything going on, it's now up for discussion as to whether or not she's going to remain in that seat, right?
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm hoping. The biggest way that real estate agents can do something about this and the general public is to vote her out on November 28, I think it is. Mm-hmm. But probably the other thing that I would suggest is I haven't seen, and maybe this just might be my social media, but I'm friends with a lot of auctioneers down in Victoria. I haven't seen outrage down there about this, and that it gives me cause for concern that people are keeping their head down. And I think a large portion of that is because they're worried that the state government's on a warpath at the moment, and it just attracts undue attention. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, in my position here, I don't really make too many political statements publicly, not on my social media. I definitely call out things on this particular podcast here, but I don't make strong worded statements like I did last weekend, which, by the way, led to a death threat. I received a death threat, and that might be something else for us to talk about later in the program. But the reality of calling things out is that there is I believe there's a very vicious circle of Labor. Let's call them lobbyists, and the difference between the Facebook responses I was getting, which is quite closed. You know how Facebook's a bit of an echo chamber, and LinkedIn, where my post was actually shared to one of these Labor lobbying groups, and that's where it went particularly pear-shaped. Most of this week I was defending against people who hadn't read the Premier's letter and hadn't read my response to it. They were attacking me for assuming that I wanted no transparency in the transaction, which wasn't, that wasn't the intention of the letter. It wasn't in my response, but they just didn't read it. It was all about, you're a real estate agent, you must benefit from this. And I'm not. I'm neither of those things. I don't benefit from it. I'm not a real estate agent. I was, but it was just bizarre. The responses I was getting, and you can go and have a look at it. My last name is very searchable. I've turned off comments now, but if you go and have a look at the LinkedIn post, it was just a pile-on of people not reading either of the documents there and responding almost in an aggressive format against me for potentially calling out the misuse of her social media for that particular purpose, and the outrage about the deceit in what she had posted.
Yeah, wow. And so, you mentioned it was from LinkedIn that happened more aggressively.
Yeah,
I think from experience, we've probably both seen more of that more commonly through Facebook. So I'm quite surprised.
Me too.
Because, LinkedIn is certainly more of, I guess, that business community, or that's certainly how I look at it. But yeah, quite surprising that that's where that kind of, attack was coming from. But, more importantly, the fact that they've kind of focused on only the bits that they saw in that. And they've kind of saw maybe one word, one sentence without reading the rest of it. And then they've just formed an assumption as well.
Yeah, and I think there are a few things. If you want to look at what I learned this week, real estate agents' public perception is in the toilet. I mean, we kind of knew that, but I think what I'm seeing from successive governments, particularly state governments, but also the federal government, we saw this under Stephen Miles just before he was ousted in the election. He came after real estate agents to try and win votes. There's no doubt about it. He was hammering them every day, and Antonia was on media. Antonia Mercarella, the CEO of the REIQ, she was on media calls like 3, 4, 5 times a day. She rolled in to a radio station to rebut a disc jockey who was going off about the real estate industry with no concept about what he was talking about. And he ended up getting fired over it. Such was the public outrage between the misinformation going backwards and forwards. So it's not like we haven't seen this before. We've definitely seen this before. It's a button that the particular governments press. We're coming into an election. We need something to galvanise people. At the moment, no government, local, state, federal, have built enough houses. So shelter is such a massive demand and massive issue. Amongst cost of living, rent costs, the costs of getting into a house. Everyone's concerned about it. The easy scapegoat is the property manager and the real estate professional. And I, for one, I am so sick of the governments using this as their go-to method to garnish more votes at the end of it without actually acknowledging the problem. It wouldn't be hard to sit back, especially at this start of it's one of my biggest complaints about Anthony Albanese is he rolled into power with massive numbers in the upper and lower house. He could have really made some changes for good. And what I would have liked to see him do is some kind of public works that involved building houses, because that would have lowered the cost. That none of this angst would exist around purchasing houses, because people who are underquoting, it wouldn't have happened. The market would have been stable. So if you want to track all of this back, all of the frustration, it's a supply and demand issue. We don't have enough houses to house the people that we're either bringing into the country, not a statement on immigration, or we're actually, who are coming through the ranks and growing up as Australians at the moment. We don't have enough. That's there is so much research out there to say that. If we just got a government in at any of the levels that actually did something about it, and, I see here in Queensland, the current state government, I think they're aiming to build 5,000 houses, which is great to see. They won't meet that target. I don't care, as long as they're doing something about it. Let's continue moving towards that. That's what the government should be doing. But in Victoria, I don't believe they've built a public house for over a decade. It's approaching 15 years now. That is insane. And then they wonder why housing's such a big issue. And then they take aim at the property professionals who are heavily regulated. Like, whether people like to admit it or not, we are over-regulated in Australia. There is no property industry in the world that has the amount of rules, regulations and compliance that we have. And that could be an actual great segue to go to New South Wales on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think, as an industry, there's a level of responsibility we need to take as the, professional as well. We do know, we see it quite frequently, that, there is misconduct. There are those that are not behaving and performing the way that they should be. But 99% of us actually do abide by our morals and ethics and really want, the vendor and the buyer and that investor to achieve the goals that they're looking for. So, it's kind of disappointing that the government just doesn't genuinely understand what it takes to perform our roles each and every day and what is required under those legislative boundaries, and how tough it can really actually be. There's challenges, there's conflicts, I don't have cash flow, there's so much that's going on, and we're the ones fighting in the middle, and now we've got a government also fighting against us. Such, just really disappointing. But yes, on to REI New South Wales. Let's talk through this. So the demands have been the ministers removal. So we've got REI New South Wales and the New South Wales government now also in a public kind of, I guess,
Spat.
fighting display, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And so, Tim McGibbon has kind of called it out as well and said that the minister and Anoulack, is that how we pronounce his name?
I'm struggling with that.
I'm struggling as well. Anoulack.
Chanthivong?
Chanthivong?
Minister Chanthivong? Not sure.
To be
Anoulack.
removed, right? Like, so he's calling for the removal of that person. So let's talk through that. How's this kind of come about?
Well, yeah, I suppose it's a bit unprecedented. I've never heard of an REI call for the minister to be removed. Maybe it's happened in the past, but how's it come about? I think out of frustration, if I'm honest. The REI NSW are saying that they are actively attempting to engage with the minister. They've tried it multiple times to engage with the minister, and every single time that it's been met with, no, we're not, he's not engaging at all. And I think the Tim's point, the CEO of the REI NSW, is that they're in a position at the moment where I think he mentioned there'd been 488 legislative changes through the year that needs to be discussed. Like, they need to have some kind of dialogue between the industry going back and forwards there. But there's not that dialogue, and it's creating a very, very difficult environment. And I think the REI NSW's point is that they're now in a position where, from a workplace health and safety point of view, it's getting so much strain on the real estate professional. Like Tim is suggesting that even with a legal degree, he is having trouble keeping up with the levels of compliance and regulation that are there. The government are coming out and smashing them when they don't meet it, but they're refusing to engage to actually say, how do we implement this? There are no education campaigns. There's no open dialogue with the industry to say, is this actually feasible? Does it work? And so born out of frustration at the lack of response, I think the REI NSW are well within their rights to come out and say, look, we need somebody else in the job, because the current guy that is there is not doing the job for which we are paying out of the public purse for him to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, and I think the government's job, or, they're making, I guess, those regulations, they're enforcing those legislative requirements, right? And I think, Tim, in governing, or, being the CEO of the REI New South Wales, in support of everyone within the real estate landscape in that state, I think he has every right to say, well, I want to sit with you and kind of look at, why have we made these changes, or what's working? What are the educational programs? And I think that the government should be consulting and making the time. Absolutely. So, yeah, I guess they have to, right?
They definitely should. Do it. The denial of a dialogue, like, even if you don't agree with what someone says, this is your state's peak body.
Yeah.
It's not. They're not a fly by night. This is not a new. The REI NSW is well over 100 years old. Someone's going to write in and say, look, they're much older than that. But they're not. This is not something that sprung out of the ground. It's not like they don't have the know-how. Like, these guys are embedded in the contractual process there. They're the very fabric that's there. It is very unusual, highly unusual, for a housing minister to ignore at least a conversation with the real estate institutes and the peak bodies of the nation. And I think the other point is it's not just the REI, as I think it stretches to the housing and construction industry as well. There seems to be a complete disdain for dialogue there. We're just going to do it this way, and this is the way it's going to go, which is disappointing, because I actually think the Chris Minns government is one. It seemed, out of all of the state governments in Australia, they seem to be doing a lot of good. Like, if you remember back to the anti-Semitic attacks down at Bondi, Chris Minns was excellent through that. His leadership has been outstanding. So, I don't know the guy, but I don't think from his perspective, having a minister who refuses to have dialogue with the industry is probably part of the narrative there. And I can't see this is going down well behind closed doors. But to this point, there's been no comment, no response to that. So people, singing for his resignation, but no response.
No response
is a bit weird. It's a bit weird.
Yeah. Yeah, well, obviously, two major states, within our nation where we've got institutes now believing and fighting, right, with our governments for being ignorant and misrepresenting them. So it kind of, what does this actually mean overall for our industry? What does it mean for for the government, and what do they need to do, I think, to kind of, they're just going out there, I think, and kind of writing laws. They're all having their meetings, and whilst they might look at papers that the REIs are delivering, they're just not actually really consulting with the right people to ensure we've got a fair, healthy and workable environment for the real estate industry. Yeah,
well, like in defence of the REIs, I don't think they want to fight. I really don't. I think their preference is for diplomacy. Is always everything that the REIV has done has been diplomatic. Even their response was like so professional. Something they've said their letter to the Premier. They've just said really nicely. We feel like she's misrepresented Toby's views. Like I had a much stronger opinion of that. I used the terms deceitful and dishonest. So I don't think they are edging for a fight or want to pick a fight. I just think that they are a convenient scapegoat when somebody's going for an election. And in New South Wales, they're not. That's a completely separate issue. It seems like there is a dysfunctional minister there, if I'm honest. If dialogue is all they're asking for, and they've got repeated occasions where dialogue is not happening, like even the REIV will admit that they're actually having a conversation with the state government. They're just ignoring what they do, and then the Victorian state government are misrepresenting them to the public. That's the problem there. It's not that the dialogue's not there. In New South Wales, the REINSW are saying there is zero dialogue, and that's broken. There's a problem there. I don't care who you are. When you stop listening to the people who make part of the housing industry, you've got a bigger problem. So, I don't think either of them want to fight, but that's kind of where they are. I guess when push comes to shove, something's got to be done about it at the end. And Tim and the REI NSW have to represent their members, just as Toby and Jacob down there have to do with the REIV. And I think they're doing a fantastic job. I really feel for them at the moment, especially Toby. I do believe that was a blatant attempt. Also in its release, they released it on a Saturday morning where the REIV is not working. So, no response to Monday, garner outrage, hope that their letter came back on the 20th of July, which was Monday of this week. It's just, even in the timing of, and no media channels, there's no press release, it's going to social media. It just looks like they're trying to get votes by smashing real estate agents. It's a bad look. It's a black eye for both governments, in my opinion.
Yeah. And look, I think in closing that out, there's lots of contradiction, right? Like we've got housing policy coming through the nation. Governments are saying they want more homes, they want more rental supply. They, investors, builders and developers are arguing that just the taxes just are not allowing them, right? And may produce the complete opposite result to what, our current government is trying to say that they want. So, I think there's a lot of contradiction. There's still that uncertainty. And I think we talk about that, every week. That's like the common word I think we keep using. There's a lack of confidence and there's just everyone feeling incredibly uncertain. And I think seeing some of these things publicly from the consumer base, that's just going to, again, bring out even further what's going on here? What should we do? Let's just kind of back off. We don't even know what's happening.
Yep. And it's a great segue because that lack of confidence. I heard our next guest speak yesterday. Was it yesterday? Thursday? No, it was Wednesday. I heard Mike speak on Wednesday at a property management breakfast organised by the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. He was delivering a keynote there on how property managers best present themselves. But Mike is an extraordinary guy. We should bring him on next, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
The privilege, the pleasure nay, the absolute delight of hearing our next guest, Mike Mortlock, Managing Director of MCQ Quantity Surveyors. Now, I've known Mike for quite some time. Mike is also a board member and the Treasurer of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, better known as Pippa. It's way easier to say than all of that. And he's also the host of, I think, a highly successful podcast called Geared for Growth, which is a property investment podcast. You've got to go and listen to that. He launched that in 2017, so it's been running a little bit longer than our 11 episode Before the Weekend. Mike, welcome to Before the Weekend.
Thank you. It doesn't mean it's good. It's just been around a while. It's a pleasure to be on.
I've been listening to it. I won't say religiously, but when I have enough time, and that has been plentiful when I'm on planes. Now, you delivered a keynote the other day, and you said the target of 1.2 million new homes was unrealistic from the moment it was announced. Why did you say that? Why do you think it's unrealistic?
Yeah, well, and we're into year 3 of that 5-year target, and it turns out I was right, not because I'm terribly clever, just because I understood the numbers and the facts, right? We've never really built at that run rate before. That's 240,000 dwellings a year. And the government was asking that to happen in a time where we were off the back of hugely increased construction costs during COVID. We were at a time where builder insolvencies were at record levels. They're still the top step of the podium for any industry, and a huge supply shortage as well in terms of trades. So the Housing Industry Association is saying right now we need 90,000 extra tradies. So you add all of those things up together, I could just see that it wasn't going to work.
Yeah, I suppose that's not rocket science, and not to downplay your intelligence on this particular one, as you did. The reality is, and we were speaking about this before you came on air in the previous topic, the reality is we just seem to be in this never-ending supply and demand cycle, and there doesn't seem to be anyone with the political willpower to do anything about it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I suppose up until the 12th of May 2026 this year. However, I would argue that it's under the guise of helping first home buyers, but I would call this a tax grab. I mean, by Treasury's own modelling, the impacts of this will be modest. They're talking an extra 75,000 first home buyers over 10 years. So that's only an increase of 7,500 a year when we're already doing, 130, 140,000 first home buyers a year. And Treasury's own modelling is saying that this is likely to be somewhat detrimental to new construction. They're not really saying that this will make any particular difference. So, yeah, there's an argument to say we haven't had a government that's had the political will. I don't think we've had a government that has spent as aggressively as this particular one. I mean, we're back to sort of COVID levels of stimulus in terms of government expenditure. So, yeah, typically the way that we've helped first home buyers is on the demand side with the 5% deposit schemes. And I shared in that presentation with you, if you look at the 6 months to March, below the caps where the first home buyers were coming in, we saw a 6.7% growth and 3.6% above that. So what happens with those stimuluses is that it just makes it harder for the next cohort of first home buyers to come in, whereas supply really was the thing that they should have been focusing on. And as I see, we're into year 3, but they failed on that and thought, well, that's a bit too hard. We'll just go and whack property investors. And that's sort of where we're at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike, I think also in regards to the supply piece, if I can kind of go to the rental sector, median rents, the Treasurer indicated as a part of this that he was predicting it to only increase by, less than $2 a week. And I think
it was $2.
$2 a week.
$2 a week.
Yeah. I think we've definitely seen that has significantly more the rental increases. With those assumptions, where do you think they just got that wrong?
Oh, like where and how? It's an absolute mystery to me. I mean, I think the Treasury maybe don't have access to all of the numbers, but what I mean by that is they said it'll go $2 a week of extra rent, and house prices will grow 2% less than they would have otherwise. So they're very familiar with the number 2. That seems to be the depth of their mathematical modelling. It's a bit like Count from Sesame Street. Well, 2, and they stopped there. You know, look, I think that prediction of $2 a week rents is even more obvious than the 1.2 million homes not being built. I think, like, if you just look at, let's say, the incentive now, they want property investors to go into new builds versus established. We did some research recently that looked at 180,000 listings, rental listings, and compared new rental properties on the market for rent, like so new build versus established, and we did some regression analysis to match them so that they were like for like. You're spending an extra 3% for a new house and around about 10% extra for a new apartment. So just if we change the mix, rents will go up if we're in new rather than established. And that ignores the fact that investors in the sort of the value for an investor has been absolutely smashed in the established market. We're not building enough. Investors can't just magically go to new. And we're talking like 1.3% national vacancy rates, high levels of immigration, and investors that are really starting to have enough, especially when we're going into a broken promise. And you were sort of saying off air, Peter, that you're now having to play by the rules of the game. And we're all aware of that. You make an investment based on the rules, but a lot of people made some decisions based on a broken election promise that this wasn't going to be touched, and now people can't go and retrospectively change the decisions that they made. Like a lot of these first home buyers with 5% deposits that are like racing towards negative equity, they don't have the ability to go back and make some changes to their decisions. But we did have a changing of the rules.
Yeah, do you think, Mike? Sorry, do you think that there's going to be a higher impact on, I guess, a smaller investor type, or the mum and dads who saved and saved and saved, and they've finally been able to get that investment property, and compared to the wealthy who might have, who have multi-say, do we think that there's going to be one more exposed than the other with these changes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, ironically, it's the people that they're allegedly trying to help. I think it's a great question, Kasey, because in the lead up to the budget, there was a lot of conversation about this generational inequity. Like there was a wealth gap between baby boomers and people that are trying to get into the first home buyer market. So what actually happened is now we've got baby boomers that are sailing off into the sunset with these grandfathered negative gearing arrangements. But for young people now that want to grow their financial future, and, a large cohort of Australians are property investors, but that pathway is all but shut, not just with the negative gearing, but with the capital gains tax as well. So it's a lot harder to grow your wealth today than it was before the 12th of May. So the people that have got multi-property portfolios don't really care about this. And there was an opportunity to cap negative gearing at 1 or 2 properties or reduce CGT discounts to 33%, but they've absolutely thrown the kitchen sink at this. And I don't think it's going to help first home buyers. Maybe, of course, there'll be less competition. There's a better chance for them to get into the housing market, but unless you're ready to go when these things happen, it becomes more expensive for the next person with these stimulus packages. And the real story that I think we're going to be hearing about is rents. That $2, I think the data will start coming through. Obviously, depending where you are, you can't necessarily raise the rent in a regular period. So it'll take some time for that to filter through. But rents are likely to go through the roof. And then the real human story is homelessness as well. I think we will see some sad statistics on that side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard from Tim Lawless, I think it was back in our second or third episode, and he was saying that there's not a lot of elasticity in the tenants' cost of living pool, if you want to call it that, for rents to rise. And then the budget came on the back end of that. So I suspect you're right. I suspect we're going to see more homelessness. I mean, I'm seeing it already on all the community pages. People who are living in cars begging for some kind of rental at amounts that are just untenable, knowing what the current market is doing. Can I put that to the side for 1 minute? One area that I think is one area of the real estate profession that I think is going to be drastically impacted is the property investment professional. And I think we've seen that already. Now, you deal a lot with these people, with these professionals that are out there, and certainly through your organisation, which is known to me, that they are definitely the professionals of society. Where do they sit? How are they responding to what has happened in the budget and the aftermath of that? Because it seems as though all forms of investors have run away from the market. Is that fair, or is there some still hanging?
Oh, no, I think broadly speaking, that is fair. There's still people that are transacting. There's still wealthy people that don't care about the tax settings and can quite easily stomach a negatively geared property to the tune of $400 or $500 a week. And that's really the reality. I think if you're buying a brand new property, of course, you've got the old rules, but brand new is typically where spruikers tend to operate. It can be a difficult area for people that aren't in the industry to navigate. The investors, the property professionals that I've been speaking to, even the ones that are doing owner-occupier stuff, demand just went off a cliff, even for owner-occupiers, because sentiment is really, really bad and nobody really understands exactly what will happen to the market. Will there be a downturn? I think sentiment tends to overreact. I think the long-term fundamentals of property are sound, by virtue of the fact that we just can't build fast enough. And I don't see us overcoming that hurdle anytime soon. But the investment professionals are pivoting different types of assets, looking at houses and granny flats, looking at unit blocks. Of course, they've got commercial property open to them as well. And just looking at ways that they can increase that yield, because the hardest time to hold an investment property is day one. And that was really what the value of negatively geared properties were in the interim. Nobody buys an investment property because they want to go out and negative geared. It's just a situation of the asset. But over time, it will become positively geared as the rents increase. But not being able to offset those losses against your income will just make it a lot harder for investors. So I think transactions will really drop. And I'm seeing that from buyers agents that work in the investment space. The pool of people that have got the ability to transact has shrunk, and there's a lot of fear around the market as well. And I think a lot of investors have just started to get the shits, for want of a better expression, because it's not just this. They've been demonized for the last three federal elections to some degree, and the residential tenancy changes across different states have been, I know you're fighting the good fight there, Peter. Many of those very poorly thought out. And investors aren't the devil. They're just people that are wanting to take control of their financial future. And we shouldn't forget, they're also trying to dequalify themselves from the age pension, right? So I don't think we should be punishing these people.
What is it? 91%. Well, I think that's 91% of mums and dads, right? Privately owned. Is that the figure that you put up on the screen the other day?
Yeah, well, 91% of housing is provided by the private sector. So public housing is a minuscule amount, but 72% of investors own one property, and less than 10% own more than two. Once you get six or more, that's
a crazy number. It just tears down this idea of the rich and wealthy property owner, because I'm aware of people with multiple property portfolios, and they are very much the minority compared to I'm mum and dad, I own my own occ and I have one other, because I saw that as being a more stable way to invest in stock and shares. So this whole narrative of the rich and wealthy landlord, it's why the rents go up, is because the mums and dads are already under cost of living constraint, and they seem to, they have to pass it on in order for it to be a fiscally valuable way to invest. I don't really get that. One thing that you mentioned there, I just want to quiz you on it. Do you think the hesitance, the lack of confidence in buying, particularly in the investor space, but maybe also in the owner-occ space, I've struggled to see anyone with a clear path. Like, there used to be a bunch of strategies around how we go about investing, and that went from first home buyers all the way through to sophisticated investors. And when this change came in with not only the budget, the budget change, and but also to tax reform, all of the playbook for how we go about investing got thrown out the window. And I feel as though there's this holding period where we're going to be trialing and testing new ways to invest. And a lot of people, I actually think a lot of people are thinking there might be a change of government and a repeal, as did happen in New Zealand at the end of it. So, there's these two line of thoughts, and I'll get to my question in a second. Has the playbook been thrown out, and are you seeing new ones being rewritten? And do you think that, there's an overall hesitancy because there might be a change of government and this might go back to the way it was?
Yeah, and I mean, there's precedence for that in our own country as well. Between 1985 and 1987, we did the same experiment, and depending on who you speak to, the outcome varies, but it was repealed for a reason, right? You can make the story tell whatever story you like, depending on which cities you zoom in on. But the net result was that it was negative, and they threw that back. So in terms of the strategy, I don't think the rule book is out the window, but it's a shaken up snow globe, for want of a better expression. I think already we're seeing people lean into the yield side of things, and the banks are starting to understand that. I mean, very quickly they were shaving the negative gearing from their assessments. Whether there is a change of government or not, if you zoom out on a large time horizon and look at the Australian property market, huge global shocks and events become quite small blips. So I do actually see this as an investing opportunity, this window where people, especially first home buyers and owner occupiers, they should be out there quite active, because everything I'm hearing from the industry is that just the fever pitch has gone. It might be gone temporarily. It might be gone until we see a change of government. But at the end of the day, we're not building fast enough. So there is a limit to the amount of growth that we can see in rents, because eventually people will just change their behaviour. And we've got the census coming up next month, and I think we'll see household formation rates increase. And I think we saw that in 24, 25, the pace of rental growth actually slowed, not for any economic reason other than the fact that households just couldn't stomach that increase in rent that we saw. A couple of years where we're talking double-digit growth, whereas over the long term, rents don't really outperform inflation. So I think everyone is taking their time to understand the rules of the game now, how it works. But the investors that have loved property pre-budget still love it today. They might not necessarily love the government, but the long-term fundamentals are there. It's just, can you hold on to and can you qualify to actually purchase this investment property? And I think if we decrease participation in property investment, the only thing that will happen is the rental pool will shrink. And I sort of say to people all the time, because people will argue with me, we can have an argument about whether housing should be an investable asset class, but only really when we have an alternative. There's around about 300,000 public housing places available, but we need around 3.4 million dwellings, because about a third of us rent. And that number doesn't really change if you go back 70 years into Australian history. There's all sorts of reasons why people rent. I rent myself. Rent vesting is a big cohort, and that's just another thing that was actually shut for first home buyers. That was a meaningful pathway for people wanting to get into property. So a lot of this, I think, has been poorly thought out.
Yeah, well, how we invest, great segue, because I think the last thing, for weeks we've been discussing my scenario.
We always talk about Peter on this podcast, just so you know, Mike.
Right.
Do you, Kasey? Normally it's negative coming from my co-host, but the reality is, like, I have a block of land I was about to build on, and the cost of building on that when I looked at it 2 years ago was $1 million. Now I can't get the amount of rent out of that. Now that's before we get to our self-managed super fund, for which I had just pulled my money out of a super fund, put it into a self-managed bear trust, and I was about to invest, and then all of this happened. Now, from my perspective, that's two possible dwellings off the market, and I'm only one person. If you're speaking to investors at the moment, where do we go with this? Like, obviously with, I've now got a block of land. Do I build on that? I mean, I know it's hard for you to know my financial circumstances, but there must be other people out there who are about to build in a time where construction, you've already mentioned, is diabolical. It's so expensive to build a house here in Australia. I just, I sit here and I go, I don't even know where to move forward with either of those. And maybe I need to speak to one of your PIPA consultants.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and we've got lots of qualified property investment advisors, and I'm not actually one. I'm a tax nerd really at heart. But you raise a really good point. I think if you look at construction costs, people will say construction costs are rising rapidly. They're not actually rising rapidly at all anymore. They just went through a 2-year period where they went through the roof. However, the war in Iran has not necessarily yet filtered its way into the data for construction costs. So that's another consideration. There was a famous message from Reece Plumbing that basically said that all of their products are going up 30% because I'm not an expert on oil, but there's a type of oil that comes from Iran that is disproportionately used for diesel, right? So there's other oil producers, but the quality of oil is much more geared towards diesel. So that's why we saw diesel peak a little bit more at the Bowser than petrol. Diesel's a big component in all sorts of different things that we have. I mean, it's in toothpaste, it's in nappies, right? But it's definitely in PVC piping and not just materials like that, plastics, there's fixings, but it's also the shipping costs as well. So diesel is a big component of moving materials around the country and the globe. It's a big component of the equipment that's used in construction. So we've actually got another problem there, as you say. And with an accelerating property market, that's where you start to see the high construction costs being absorbed, and it sort of makes a little bit more sense. But in a lot of places, it's still cheaper to buy an established dwelling than it is to build a new one. And part of the problem that we have is the Australian politicians, federal and state, are drunk on property taxes, and about 40 to 50% of the cost of a new, say, house and land package coming onto the market is taxes. So if they really wanted to meaningfully move the needle on supply, they could find a way to go to rehab to get themselves off this property tax drug.
Find a way to go to rehab to get themselves off the property.
Absolutely.
So is that your solution, Mike? We need to put some politicians in rehab. But it's not for the things that I thought.
Yeah, but I mean,
Mike,
Peter, I'd like to try and sort of get back to your question. It's hard to know. And I think for a lot of people, it changes the way that they are strategizing about investing. And really for a lot of people, it stretches out their time horizons. For people that might be looking to try and purchase a property and make some equity gains, either just naturally through capital growth or for some equity with uplifts or renovations and then move into the next one, those timelines are definitely stretched because the property is much more cash flow hungry. Of course, the politicians will say, oh, negative gearing hasn't really disappeared. It's just, quarterized losses that you can use in the future if the property becomes positively geared or if you sell that. But in lots of the modeling that I've done, you'll get to the point where you own a property, let's say for 10 years and you sell it and it looks great on paper because a lot of these models, you're not paying any capital gains tax, but only because the amount of losses are actually far bigger than that capital gains tax impost there, to the point where a lot of those losses are actually going in the bin. So it's not just a timing thing. You can actually accrue so many losses that you're technically due for a credit. But the real issue, I think, as I mentioned before, is timing, right? Yeah. $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. So that being able to go to the accountant, get a refund based on some losses from that particular property, because at the end of the day, you are running a business. That business is a property that rents and there are costs that are associated with that. And, negative gearing is costing the government, if you look at, say, if you zoom out for about 5 years, about $3.6 billion. But for the federal government to buy 3 odd million public housing properties, I worked out to be about 2.4 trillion. So it's actually the best deal that you could think of. If the government is not going to provide this supply, they need private investors to do it. And the government seems to be annoyed that they've just done such a good job of it.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you think, Mike, that with the SMF borrowing kind of changes that are coming in place, builders are, I guess, out there sort of saying that they really feel as though there's going to be thousands of those signed new contracts that of those were buying within their self-managed super fund are now just going to cancel, right, because of these changes. Is it something that you're already seeing? Do you think that that's a credible warning from the building industry?
Yeah, look, I think the building industry it needs help. There's all sorts of problems. Productivity in the building industry is an issue. There's all sorts of influences like unions that can be an impediment to things. There's issues with the way that we're financing innovative construction methods. Banks don't really have products and understand how to finance modular construction and all sorts of things like that. So we've got a lot of issues. I think residential property purchased in self-managed super funds is a relatively small piece of the overall property investment pie, but we've certainly seen a lot of panic. Property mortgage brokers have been run off their feet with trying to get these SMSF assessments through. We've really only got a couple of weeks before those transactions are able to happen. And I don't really understand why they've done it in that way. There's all sorts of little nuances, like, for example, your principal place of residence, if you rent it out post-budget, it will be considered a negatively geared asset. Whereas in 2017 budget, when they changed the deductions based on depreciation for plant and equipment, they basically said it had to be income producing as at budget night. So there's lots of unintended consequences from, I think, poorly thought out legislation.
Yeah. Last one, Mike, before we, set you off on this fabulous Friday and get on with your weekend. I'm sure you don't want to you don't want to, continue chatting to us all day, although I've found this incredibly enlightening. One for the property managers.
Wants to get rid of you, Mike.
No, I don't want to get rid of you, actually. I've found this incredibly insightful. I guess, the implications for property managers more so, right? I think now more than ever, they're having to deal with the challenging conversations or, those landlords kind of connecting sort of, what do I do? But for me, what's the one piece of advice that you think those that are operating in property management right now should be, in fact, discussing with those property owners?
I think ideally be as educated as you possibly can about the budget and how it actually impacts property investors, because at the end of the day, that's the client that they're there to serve. And at the industry breakfast I was at with Peter, I sort of broke it down into three different components, help them to understand where there are actually tax deductions available and the fact that they can claim their deductions in a financial year and then have it ready to offset a future capital gain. Help them to understand maintenance, because properties are difficult to hold on to, especially if you're buying post-budget because of the negative cash flow. So you need to plan for breakdowns of hot water systems, repairs and maintenance expenses that pop up. And I think also look at ways that you're able to increase the rental return in concert with the landlord. Meaningful renovations and improvements to property can certainly help the yield. And I think for property managers, they need to be prepared for, unfortunately, quite a lot of distress coming from tenants, because this situation has definitely disincentivized investing in residential property. And that might sound like a good idea because first home buyers will just replace the property investors, but that's not the actual reality. Every time a property investor leaves, there isn't magically born a first home buyer to take their place. There's so many people that aren't in a position or don't actually want to own their own home. They might be new migrants. They might not have great credit. They might be just living in a certain spot for work, but that's not where they want to be. They could be on a disability support pension. That's why if you look, the long term, a third of us rent. I don't think that that's fundamentally going to change. So those people do need somewhere to live, and property managers will unfortunately be dealing with, I think, a lot of distressed people in the next little while.
Yeah, some really great feedback there for the PMs listening today. So, yeah, thanks so much, Mike. I could actually keep talking to you for a really long time, but like I said, I'm sure you don't really want to spend the time with Peter. You might like to spend the time with me.
You do seem charming, Peter. He's a work in progress.
This is the third time in 2 weeks, I think, on Mike. So you're going to stop meeting like this. But I really appreciate you jumping online and giving us your insights. We're going to have some links up to where you can find Mike at MCQ, Quantity Surveyors, Pippa, and any other paraphernalia that we choose to put there, like his social media. He's quite prolific on that as well. But I really appreciate you coming on board, Mike. Enjoy your weekend at the start. It's Friday today, so hopefully you get the rest of the day off and you can go and relax because you've been out busy this weekend.
Oh, mate, I've no rest for the wicked, but the Tour de France is really heating up, so I'll be glued to that over the weekend. But I appreciate the invite. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks,
Take
Mike.
it easy, mate. Thank you.
Cheers.
And obviously that was Mike Mortlock. Mike is a fountain of information and quite a funny dude too, especially when you're talking about boring subjects. Sorry, Mike, boring subjects like, economy, tax. He presented really well at the property management breakfast for the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. Lots of questions from the property managers. Like they got both of us up because I was the other keynote and no one had any questions for me. They're all for Mike. So
they were all for Mike.
Yeah, and to be trumped by somebody who's talking on that topic, not cool, Mike. If you're listening to this, not cool. But no, it was seriously well done by him. It's a really important topic to get your head around, and I think he's right. That last point to property managers. It is unfortunately just another thing that they've got to carry in their kit bag is a basic knowledge of the changing tax law and the budget and what that means. But let's move on, right?
Yes.
We've got two more stories before the end of this episode, and the one of them is from Queensland. We've focused a lot on New South Wales, Victoria, and the national scheme. Queensland, I think the way I read this is Queensland significantly increased public housing evictions for repeated and serious behaviour issues. Now, that to me normally probably wouldn't make news because you and I think we're both of the opinion that repeated serious behaviour breaches probably should lead to an eviction. You as a former property manager and me having been involved closely in that space, we would both agree that is normal. But now we're actually going, well, what why is this such a problem? And I think the issue has to do with that supply and demand issue and shelter again. It seems to be what we talk about. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it's always been something that we have practiced, right? In, I guess, that private sector. So interestingly to see that the Queensland government is now looking at what are those serious offences and what is the process of that. And I think I read in that article that they have to receive 3 warnings and it's got to be of a serious, so aggressive language, harassment, or damage to the property, where they're now then saying, well, there will be an eviction and an immediate ban, which then I guess brings it back to then where are those people then going to home themselves? Are they then going to go into the private sector? Who's going to provide the references for them if they've already been evicted? And then again, we're just going to find, more homelessness coming into our state. But whilst I agree that there absolutely should be consequences and they shouldn't be taking advantage and being ungrateful for the fact that they potentially have housing at a less of a price compared to those in the private sector. But it still kind of brings back to where then are they going to go?
Yeah, it's a sophisticated issue. follow closely an acquaintance. You know how Facebook calls everyone a friend. It's not really a close friend of mine, but somebody I have on Facebook. And I watched her and her husband's story of living next to public housing, and you know the videos that they have posted. No one deserves to live next to people like that. Like
100%.
To use the word animal. Regarding that behaviour, you know, with things like feces being thrown over the fences and stuff like that. It was absolutely disgusting behaviour, and disturbed their peace and quiet and their right to enjoy their property. And these people, I think it took 18 months to evict them. So I'm not exactly sure how the 3-strike policy worked, but for whatever reason, these people were never being evicted. There were multiple complaints. The people that I'm referencing, my friends on Facebook, they were in fear quite often about their own safety from where they were, and it just gets, you know, I really feel for neighbours when this kind of thing happens. But you're dead right; it's a complex issue because we have, you know, public housing exists for people with addiction, family violence. After you know, it's there for that, and it should be. Mental illness is another one that's there, and then you know, then there are a whole range of people in between. Lower socioeconomic, can't work for whatever reason, and I feel like I feel even it's too broad to say no tenant looks after their house. That's not the case. I have had tenants who look after the house better than I would. That's not the case, but there are a percentage of tenants who will willfully not care because they don't own it, and they'll see it as an inconvenience that they have to pay rent, and then they'll see the upkeep of that property also as an inconvenience, and so when you're living next to somebody like that, it becomes very difficult. Like, they're affecting your peace and quiet is one thing, but in the public system, it makes it a little bit harder to understand because effectively our taxes are going towards the subsidisation of their well-being and shelter. So a complex issue. I don't know whether, you know, I don't know where I'm at it, but I think now where there's a shortage of housing because we haven't built enough public houses, my overriding feeling is the people who approach it in a way where they actually care about society around them and they're assimilating and they're part of that, they should probably get the housing before the ones that are creating a problem for the community that they're living in. That's where I lie, but because it is so complex and there are, you know, there might be a mental health illness at play there. We just don't know. So I'm just hoping, the one thing that I really, really am trusting, and I shouldn't be trusting the government for, is that the people vetting those procedures know what they're doing when it comes to housing. You know, in the same way that an experienced property manager will use compassion and will argue that compassion to a landlord, and I've seen this multiple times. It's the area of our industry we don't talk about. I'm really hoping that the government is using some kind of compassion when it approaches that, and it's probably a bit of a message for anyone in public housing that, you know, there are limited beds, limited roofs, so it might be time to take that seriously. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I think, look, some of the statistics there are quite also fairly alarming. I think in the first year of the policy coming in, it was like over 1,000 warnings, and then it kind of leads to somewhat of like 900 odd breaches, and then it got to that 122 kind of evictions. So I think it's, you know, it also indicates in the article that they're looking at the different situations. So as to probably answer some of your queries, it kind of does indicate that they've allowed for some of those complexities when they've been looking at the situations, like, well, why did maybe this antisocial behaviour, you know, occur in that instance? But, you know, I think it just comes down to the fact that, you know, to your point, are we putting the right people? Like, what is that selection criteria for those going into public housing? You know, and are we making sure that, for example, those that have come from a domestic violence situation, that then they're not surrounded by others that might be disrupting and causing particular behaviours, which then can then in turn have then further mental illness. So incredibly complex, this situation. And obviously we don't know every key part of it, but, I think for everyone, we've got to respect our neighbours. We've got to abide by what it means to be a tenant, regardless of whether or not it's public or private.
Yep. And if you're experiencing homelessness, we'll put up some links of places that you can go to as part of this podcast. And also shout out, if you're not experiencing homelessness, to support one of my favourite charities, which is a group called REINSW. They're amazing at bridging the gap between homelessness and getting back into society. And you should go and check out what the guys at actually the guys at REINSW and their entire team do. Amazing story, well worthy of looking at, especially if you're in the property industry. It could be a good one to align with. Let's move on. Look, in this week in real estate behaviour, there have been a couple of stories that are bypassed because I think we have more wood to chop than focusing on those. One of those is a constant influencer. I think you've sent me a few of his links, who says he's a real estate agent's worst nightmare, but he's only really garnering 20 to 30 likes on his Instagram post. So I've kind of bypassed that one for this week. But there is this one that came out that's super important regarding privacy and how we approach privacy from a property professional perspective. Now, this gentleman, I don't know the exact story. He didn't allude to it, but he was talking about a major franchise. Again, not going to name the franchises. Our job here isn't to sledge them. From all reports, spoiler alert, they did the right thing in the end. But how this played out is this man was escaping from some kind of violent scenario. And my guess is an organised crime syndicate, but that wasn't mentioned. So that's just alleged I'm just saying that it could have been like that. It actually sounded, the way he was putting it forward, was that he was almost in witness protection, right?
A little bit.
Yeah, it almost got that. So he's moving to a place in another state, far away from where he lived. He hasn't told his parents. He hasn't told his friends. They haven't even told anyone they're moving. They've upped and they've purchased a house, and they have moved under the cloak of secrecy and in the dead of night. They've gone into this property, and it wasn't until they went back to visit some of their friends and family that there was a throwaway comment at a party where someone goes, "I know exactly where you live now." The deal was done. They had settled. They'd moved in, and they were thinking, "Oh, look, we're safe now. We're home and hosed. We're in a different location. No one will know." And then a family friend said, "I know exactly where you've lived. This person told me." And he's like, "Oh, who is this person?" The story goes on, and there is an employee within the franchise that's of the real estate agent who sold the property, who was the selling agent in it. And that person had gone back and disclosed apparently they were unknown, but they were mutual friends with the same circle group. That person had gone and disclosed the location and all the details of the purchase, because he mentioned the details. It wasn't just, it was the purchase price and a bunch of other things. Disclosed all of that to the family, the family friends. So that got out. This person starts receiving threats to that property. So, look, if you're listening to this and you're a real estate agent out there, and if you're anyone that operates within the office admin staff, you are bound by privacy laws. There's no two ways about it. And you can't be disclosing that information, no matter how innocuous you think that may be. And that includes where a person rents. Like I've heard, of property managers handing out the address of where someone rents because they want to go over there. We don't know. You just can't do that. You can't pull from the books, right? Is that not just an unwritten rule in your? Would you have you ever heard of this happening before?
Oh, look, I have, in terms of probably disclosing phone numbers, email addresses, maybe income. I've definitely seen that, and I have heard it myself. People on the phone, and they don't know who the other person is. There hasn't been that qualification, and someone asking this information, and I have seen and witnessed firsthand a property manager disclosing that private information. But to this extreme, no, from what we've kind of heard, I guess, in that video recording. But, the employee was dismissed. And as you said, that particular office.
Thought the franchise, they handled it really well, right?
They handled it really well, that they dealt with it. And in the video, he acknowledged that. But it was more to the point of that, this particular employee totally just went and disregarded any type of privacy law here and disclosed every piece of information about this particular person to whoever, and then, has caused, I guess, further issues down the line. So I think this is probably, other than I guess an immediate termination, potentially this could be a far more serious matter. And a lawsuit involved here potentially.
We need to move somewhere else now because of that. Now, look, he didn't say that. He actually seemed pretty. It seemed like the issue had been resolved. I don't know if that's the case, but certainly he didn't seem to have any animosity. In fact, he was actually praising the actions of the franchise afterwards, their acceptance of the problem and their admission that, yes, that did actually happen. And I think in a lot of, if I could just draw something to learn out of that as well, that is hugely important. The franchise could have gone to bed and said, or bedded down and gone, we didn't do any of that, and then it would have been the case of a burden of proof. But the commercial reality of the scenario and common sense prevailed. So I was actually really impressed to hear the response, even though that was there was a problem at the first place. Makes it very difficult for a principal, right?
Absolutely.
Because that really comes back to the principal and the franchise group. Even the fact that they were talking about it, they named the franchise in that Instagram post, and it had thousands of views. So there was still damage being done. But well done to the franchise for actually cleaning up. And I think that's that's the end of our topics for this week. And it's been a fun-filled week, I would say.
Yes, it
Kasey.
has.
Yeah, I think if I had to close it out, my frustration is around the government's leveraging real estate and property to wedge real estate agents, property professionals, property managers, to wedge against them and potential votes. I think this is the part of the episode that I'm not liking. I don't like it at all. I just don't think it should have a place. I think when politics gets into real estate, it has the potential to tear the very fabric about, of what we're doing away. But there would be three major takeaways that I would throw to real estate professionals. I think what I've learned this week is our social standing has taken an absolute pasting. And it might not be because of us, but and it's never been wonderful. I know the stats on where we sit. Well, it hasn't been wonderful for a very, very long time. And we seem to try to arrest that, but then it gets undone again. And sometimes it's undone by own goals, like real estate agents operating really badly within the space. In this particular instance, it's been undone by governments going for votes. And that to me is disappointing. But yet again, I would plead with any property professional that now is not the time to be. Look, don't be a dick anytime, but now, particularly now is not the time to be impacting our social standing. This is a time for professionals to stand up and really dictate why they are worth the money that they're worth. And we've heard that countless times. We've heard that. Avi Khan said that from Ray White. We heard that from Tim Lawless. Yeah. Everything in the industry seems to be pointing to the fact that we need to be operating more professionally than what we're doing at the moment. And now is really a big time to do that. And part of that is the need for transparency. Every little misleading price guide, every poorly handled tenancy, every hidden financial relationship or badly explained process, it just hands the government another opportunity to portray the entire profession as dishonest. And so, right now, especially if you're in New South Wales or Victoria, that they're just gunning for you. So it's hard to say don't screw it up, don't make a misstep, but I think that's pretty big. And thirdly, if you are in those states at the moment, you need to be aware that the governments are out to get you, particularly in Victoria at the moment. They're trying to make an example of property professionals you just got to try and bed down for the election and maybe do something about it come November. Victorians, if you're listening, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You might be able to do something about this. What are your thoughts, Kasey?
Yeah, look, I definitely agree with those three takeaways. I guess my closing line for everyone listening, and in particular, if we do have anyone from the government listening into Before the Weekend podcast, just remember that agents did not create the housing shortage. And I think turning your campaign into being that next governor or whatever, position you want to be in, the minister, or maybe you want to be the prime minister. I don't know what that feels like for you, but turning us all into villains is absolutely not going to solve the supply issue that we have in housing right now. And that's my closeout for today.
Amen.
Peach,
Preach it, Kasey. That is spot on. We didn't create the housing shortage.
We never created it. So we're here to help those. And we shouldn't be put to the side as being these villains and being the ones that are the bad people in this situation whatsoever. So let's keep those professional standards high so they have nothing to come at us, guys.
Exactly.
So let's really do that. Yeah.
Exactly. If you're listening to this, you can catch us on most of the streaming services that are out there, but we're also on beforetheweekend.com. If you get lost, that's where you need to go. It'll have all of the details on there. Don't forget, you can write to us, hello@beforetheweekend.com. Send us any suggestions you have, people that you might want to see on the program, questions that you might have, topics that we may not be aware of. You can send us T-shirts, for crying out loud. I'll wear them. I'm not sure how many people will watch them. I'll wear them inside out like I'm doing this one today. Hey, look, if you are a property professional and you're heading into the weekend, we wish you all of the very best on behalf of Kasey and I. We hope you have a happy experience on the weekend, either selling, leasing, doing whatever it is you might be doing. And from episode 11, Friday the 24th of July, we will catch you in another 7 days and talk to you about whatever has occurred between now and then. Kasey, thanks for joining me. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Pete. You too. Everyone out there, have a fantastic weekend. And that's a wrap on Before the Weekend.
Before the weekend. Before the weekend. Before the weekend. Breathe it out. Be the calm, be the light. Tell the truth, do it right. Hold your word, keep it clear. Let them know you are